Today I'm joined by Nick Webb. Nick is the head strength and conditioning coach of the Indian national cricket team. Previously worked with cricket in New Zealand and professional rugby clubs. Nick holds a master in health science, sports science, and strength and conditioning from the Auckland University of Technology. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Christian. Good to be here.
Nick, how's a Kiwi doing in India?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's much different to Kiwi life, but no, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's been a good experience so far with some great players and some exceptional fans. It's just a much different ecosystem compared to New Zealand, but it goes part and parcel with the role.
Yeah. Having lived and worked in India myself, I know that cricket in India is probably what the All Blacks are to New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you times that by about 100.
How did you get into strength and conditioning?
It started when I was about 19, 13, almost 14 years ago. So I was studying at AUT, the Bachelor Sport Rec, and then essentially how the program works is that in the last 2 years, you have to do a certain amount of experience as part of the courses, which was great. And I decided to do my project with a semi-professional rugby side, North Harbour Rugby, which kind of was a good segue to strength and conditioning. And then it slowly progressed more and more into some part-time work. And yeah, it just led on from there. It kind of fueled my passion for the area, and allowed me to get enough experience to, slowly progress up the roles and the ranks and get a little bit more experience and learn how I want to operate as a practitioner. So it all started basically in uni. The sport rec at AUT was excellent because you start with such a broad area, and because I had no idea what I wanted to get into when I was that young, and it allowed me to form the base knowledge around strength conditioning and physiology and biomechanics, and eventually decided I wanted to have a crack at this role and this area of expertise. And then it led to some great experiences and getting my master's in the same area as well. So it all started with university. I entered the ranks, I guess, of education, not knowing what I wanted to do. So that was a good start.
And that the study sparked your interest in strength and conditioning. That's what I understand.
Yeah, big time. Okay. And the AUT setup of how they operated their courses forced you to start thinking about experience. So that was a good little addition. So you can kind of have a feeder of what the industry would be like.
Yeah. And your role with Cricket India was after the last World Cup.
Yeah, essentially basically straight after. So the World Cup finished, I think, July, August maybe. And then India went straight to the West Indies. And then during that time, the interview processes were happening. And I started in September.
Cool. As an S&C coach, what was your darkest moment?
Oh, look, when you sent through these questions, I actually had to really think about it. And there's probably a couple. There's probably, I could easily sit here and tell you that, players get injured or they miss games. Unfortunately, that's inevitable with, contact sport and rugby and cricket. But you just got to try and mitigate that risk. But I think the darkest moment was a couple. And it's a reality for a lot of S&Cs as you get deeper into your career that you lose your job or you get made redundant. They were tough positions to get through. Obviously financially and emotionally, and because you give such a lot to a program, and at the end of the day, you can't control these sort of outcomes. So darkest moments, being made redundant from a role and essentially moving on from another one, in positions where you have a young family it was the first one essentially was a more difficult one to take because as a young practitioner, you're so focused on you want to get to the top, and you've got such a beeline for where you want to head, and then to get that ripped underneath you from being made redundant. And essentially in your mind, you didn't do anything wrong, but it was just the nature of, new coaches coming through. That was a big learning curve. And essentially it made me realize that it's just a business. And, you can do, as long as you can, if you leave a job knowing that you've given that program 100%, that's all that really matters. So it was a big learning from that. That was probably a darkest moment, but also a big learning moment as well, about how to handle situations like that, and how to focus on the future as well.
How did you recover?
Got a new job. But look, we had a bit of a grace period in terms of when we got made redundant, and I was fortunate enough to leverage some of my relationships as well, that I've made over the previous couple of years. So I went into a role temporarily, and then got the role with New Zealand Cricket a couple of months later.
What was your best moment?
In terms of euphoria, I think when I worked for the New Zealand Warriors Rugby League Club, I was only an assistant S&C back then, but I think back in 2011, I think it was the last time the club made the NRL Grand Final, and all three teams in the club made the final, which is a pretty significant achievement, with the top side, the senior side, making the final, the reserve grade, and the under 20s. So it was proof in the pudding that the structure that the club had was working, and at that time, and it was just validation, I guess, of all the hard work and the sacrifices we made as a group back then. Pretty well led by a guy called Craig Walker back then, who was an Australian. He's back with the Roosters now. But then there's stalwarts still there now. Dane Norden, Ruben Wiki's still there. He was part of the setup as well. So that was a pretty big highlight, going to play over in Sydney with 3 full teams and support staff there. And obviously we didn't win the final, but it was a hell of an experience, and something that I'm definitely proud of.
If you could travel back in time 10, 15 years, what advice would you give a younger you?
Probably not to, if I was to advise myself, not to pigeonhole myself into just S&C. You get so worked up around sets and reps and schemes and programming, and that it's the more experienced you get, the more you realize the industry is just about people, and how you manage people, and how you lead people, and how you have quality conversations, and how quickly you learn, and the sort of mindset you go in, and trying to empower other athletes to have the same sort of mindset, because at the end of the day, they are their best coaches. But also, learn from other resources as well. Like business has a huge correlation, and huge correlation with sport, and a lot of those organizational factors you can take into how you manage sport, and the S&C profession. So I guess not just pigeonholing yourself into just S&C, because end of the day, it is unfortunately, it's quite a volatile industry. You're on term contracts, and look, the contracts could end, pretty quickly. We're fortunate back in New Zealand that we're not as probably ruthless as the EPL, and you get sacked the next day, which is really fortunate. Actually, it gives you a little bit of certainty, but that's just the reality of the industry. So I guess you gotta, if I was to again advise my younger self, it's the industry. It's harder than I anticipated and volatile. People see all this glamour and working with all these top teams. Look, and it's excellent. It's been very rewarding for me, and I'm very grateful for the positions that I've been in, and the experiences I've had. But look, it's not as easy as students think it is. You have to work hard. You have to leverage relationships, and you have to just be prepared to sacrifice things. It doesn't come easy.
And you mentioned the term business. I saw you're currently also studying and doing an MBA. How did that come about?
Yeah. So I mean, that happened. I've always wanted to do it, and that was also me sitting down and learning and reflecting around where do I want to head to in the future. And yeah, unfortunately, I won't see myself in this industry, even hopefully in the industry, but probably not the S&C role in 10, 15 years time. As with a family, I want to be able to see my kids and spend time with my family, and being on the road, for another 10 years, I don't think I will do my kids justice with that. But in saying that, I will, whatever role I do now, I will give 100%. But yeah, anyway, I signed up to do a master's in business administration, which is part of my own development, and I started that this year. I'm about 6 weeks in at the moment, and look, and it really validates and justifies my reasoning for it, because there is a huge similarity with business and sport. The first paper I'm currently doing is about teamwork and leadership. So, and that's right up my alley, So, yeah, it's another string to my bow, and hopefully look to more overall overarching management roles, and potentially just broaden my scope of roles and ways that I can add my skills and experience to other sort of industries as well.
What advice would you give young aspiring S&C coaches?
Just that. Exactly the same that I would give my young self, I mean, you'd have to be prepared to work hard, get experience. Like the university theory-based education is excellent, and you have some great universities out there. But I think the earlier that you can get experience and start getting experience and learning how to influence people, athletes of young to old, experienced to junior, the better you will be in this industry. And that's something that I really only started focusing on, 5 or 6, 7 years into my career. It was more about the theory and sets and reps and how I develop a periodization plan and programming and trying new things. But it's also around how you communicate with athletes of different levels and parents, if you're working with young athletes as well, how you create influence and affect change and behaviors as well. So, I mean, a lot of the soft skills, the hard skills are 100% important, but it's the soft skills that are hugely important as well, because you always hear people saying people don't care what you know. They care about how you can help them. And that comes with, relationship building and building trust as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It seems to be a common trend amongst S&C coaches that early in your career, you're very focused on what's the right thing to do, reps, sets, loading schemes, periodization, whatever. But then later you realize it's actually how you can build relation, generate buy-in. These kind of things become much more important than how should I do 3 or 4 sets.
Yeah. And it was even, but the entire process was even heightened when I took over the Indian job, because as a Kiwi who had purely just worked in New Zealand, I was essentially going over there as a foreigner, the only foreigner in the national setup. Different language. Yeah, granted, they all speak English, but a lot of them speak Hindi. New language, new culture. Different way of thinking, different setups, mindsets, different way of programming. Everything is different. So, I mean, essentially, and you're dealing with 35 CEOs essentially over there, which I consider, because I get asked the question a lot over in India. These guys are big deals in India, and they're treated in such a high esteem, and these guys are big brands. So these guys are worth a lot of money, and for them to be on the park is a big deal, because essentially India have such a treadmill, so to speak, or a revolving treadmill of talent, that if you miss 1 or 2 games, then that could be their career, and that comes on me as well, and keeping them on the park and keeping them fit and enhancing their training environment. So I thought when I went over there, if I can really hone in on my active listening skills and understand the culture to create influence and just listen and really focus on the soft skills and understand where they're coming from, that would create a great foundation for trust and buy-in. And the feedback that I've been giving, I have been given, that's been the way to approach the role. And we've got some great players that are buying into my way of thinking and doing things now. And look, I firmly believe that I'm not going to be able to influence everyone, but I think that by honing in on the soft skills when I took over this role in a new culture and a new team, a new language, it really set a great foundation for myself in this role.
Yeah. I've actually noted that down as a question for later, but it fits in perfectly. I mean, I mentioned I've been to India. I know what cricket means to India. And these athletes are high profile celebrity, kind of almost demigods in the Indian country. What's your approach to working with these kind of high profile athletes, people, players?
Oh, look, and again, you're not the only one that's asked me this. I think you could almost, I mean, I'm a fan of cricket and I'm a fan of all these players. I think they're exceptional talents and everyone that I've worked with. But I think if you can approach it in a way that you don't think of them as these godly players, you almost have to humanize them. And either the day, I only think of them as people. And I'm there for the sole purpose for them. And I don't treat them any different from, say, Virat Kohli through to a junior player. They're all treated exactly the same. And you quickly realize that these guys, it's all about performance for them. Like I said, there's a revolving, treadmill of talent out there, and they want to perform, and then they need to perform. It's a lifestyle for them as well. And it's a way to build their brand. And there's a whole other factors to consider. But I just treat them like people, and I focus on how I can influence their performance.
Yeah, cool. What's your coaching philosophy?
It's changed a lot over the last 13 years, but I think it's a good segue into what we've already discussed around, it's people first, sport second. At the end of the day, what we do has to be, people focused or athlete focused, but then and sport driven and performance driven, which is a great guideline for how I operate, especially around how I approach the Indians. And my Indian job, because like I said, these guys have got a lot going on in their lives, and we need to ensure that, because we play so often, we need to make sure that athlete is 100% ready, 100% has 100% buy-in, and everything around their life is okay too, because that will just add to their stress and all the other expectations that they have to, what is burdened on them purely by being in the national role. So that's essentially, I like to keep it simple. I always treat the person first and always focus on performance. And we have to nail the performance, because we essentially sometimes only have 2 days between games, 3-4 max. So you really have to be really specific and hone in and what really matters. It's kind of changed as well. I mean, over the years, I could have told you a holistic point of view as well, a holistic sort of philosophy. It's still relevant, but that's still part of focusing on the athlete, and trying to, or ensuring that the athlete is absolute priority and everything around their life is okay. That's the crux of it. But I like to keep it pretty simple, and keep it, people focused and performance driven.
Yeah, and I guess by keeping it people focused, it's already holistic in itself.
That's right, 100%.
What are your core values?
I really value respect. You have to respect the person, you respect where they're coming from, and respect where they want to head to as well. And myself, I really value loyalty as well, but I know some in the sports industry you can get caught out with that, and that's part of the reason why one of my darkest moments was when I got made redundant. I really took that personally. I thought I was being so loyal to this company, but at the end of that, it was just business. I mean, but I still value my key value of as loyalty. I'm loyal to the team, the athletes, my family, my kids, and it's a big value that I hold dearly to me. And big one's respect and honesty and open communication. I think if you have all those three, I think you have a great foundation for an open, growth focused and learning environment, whether that's at home or whether that's in the performance environment with a team or an organization.
Yeah, I think the loyalty part is an interesting one, right? Because I think if you want to get the best for your athletes, you have to be extremely loyal. But on the same side, as you mentioned, the organization, it's business.
Yeah, it's just business. And you got to realize that it is just business, and you've got to, end of the day, when situations like that happen, you just have to look after number one. And look, and that's just natural. That's just natural. When things are going pear-shaped, unfortunately, for whatever reason, for many other people, you just have to make sure that you look after yourself and your family ethically, though. I mean, and it's just I'm lucky enough that I've had great relationships with everyone that I've worked with. So it hasn't been, I haven't left or been moved on with any sort of spiteful sort of attitude towards anyone. It's been quite amicable, and I just take anything like that with a grain of salt and an opportunity to learn from the experience. And it almost hardens you. It almost hardens you to the industry.
I think that's a good point. Which person has influenced you most and why?
I guess there's been quite a few people, but I think not one specific person. I think my experiences have influenced me and the people that have been in there. I think, being in the Warriors environment really taught me how to deal with a multicultural environment, how to deal with people. Craig Walker was excellent at that in creating buy-in and dealing with different cultures. He was an Australian. We also had Australians in the side. We had Kiwis, we had Polynesians. I think one of the reasons why we were so successful. Heinrich Milan, who I work with at New Zealand Cricket and City Stags, he's an excellent skills coach. He's not an S&C, but he's a cricket coach. Me and him were in the trenches for 5 years, developing that district at the coalface. He's an excellent leader, great communication. He's a very modern, contemporary coach. Lance Hamilton at City Stags as well, general manager, high performance, excellent manager, excellent leader, highly organised. Learn a lot from him and how he deals with conflicts and scenarios and manages the full program. So those are the key guys. And obviously, with behind any sort of success, there's a wife or a partner or another meaning behind them. And my wife always questions me to my dislike sometimes, but she definitely keeps you honest keeps me honest and always ask the right questions and make sure I'm doing things for the right reason. And she's my biggest supporter as well. So
cool. New Zealand has managed to put themselves on the landscape of cricket. They reached the World Cup final 2019 and literally being the unlucky second.
Should have won.
I heard about that, yeah. You've been in the cricket ecosystem in New Zealand. What did they do to really get to the top of the world?
I think New Zealanders in general in sport, they've always been known to punch above their weight, and I think it's almost number 8 wire mentality, meaning we say that over here because essentially we're not the richest country, we're not the most highly resourced, but we make things work, and it comes down to a mindset. And New Zealand cricket's high performance philosophy is around learning and growth, and making sure that they are one of the quickest learners, whether that's acutely or over time. Look, and the system in New Zealand cricket is vastly different to India. Like vastly different, and the setup. So I mean, like New Zealand cricket have very good people in the districts as well. There's Auckland, Northern Districts, CD, Wellington, Canterbury, and Otago, and there's not a lot of state sides, but they have great people in there, and they have great people in there. So when Black Caps go back into their cities or states, they are looked after very, very well. And look, the Black Caps environment, the New Zealand cricket environment, they're very clear with how they want to play and how they want to express themselves on the field with your humility and sportsmanship. And I think a lot of teams respect that. Look, and we have some exceptionally talented players as well, and they work exceptionally hard, knowing that there are teams and countries who far outweigh the amount of resources and finances, financial support that New Zealand cricket have, which just enhances their mindset to they just need to work harder and smarter. So I'm not surprised that New Zealand cricket have made the last 2 finals. They seem to buck the trend of previous years where they kind of faltered in the semi-final stages, but they seem to be stepping up and getting better. And that crux of athletes that have played in the 2015 and 19 World Cups, there's some still there, and they had that experience that they could bring to the 2019 World Cup as well. And so a lot of the support staff are still there as well, so they brought that experience. So like they've been an inspiration to New Zealand, because young New Zealand cricketers, men and females, they want to play like that. They want to be seen as being humble and have great sportsmanship, but play hard and fair. And that just has a trickle down effect to increasing participation numbers within cricket in New Zealand, which over time hopefully will enhance that treadmill of athletes coming through the pathways as well. So it all has its benefit and effect.
Sounds a little bit like the no dickhead policy of the All Blacks, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, and you have to get that balance right. Look, New Zealand rugby are very fortunate. They have a lot of very good players. And New Zealand cricket does too. But I think when you have to apply that philosophy, you need to make sure that you have enough resources or athletes or players to replace that dickhead as well. And look, organizations need to be aware of how toxic is that one person, or do they just need to be led better, or they need to be managed better, and how do you do that? Do you do it through peer leadership and self responsibility, and getting their teammates alongside them and say, hey, pull your head in, or is it more organizational? So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but New Zealand cricket have done that very well. There is a no dickhead policy, and it's worked very well, because it's self-policing as well, and you're there for the team and have a team first mentality rather than a selfish mentality. You're there for yourself.
Yeah. Cool. Dealing with individuals. As S&C coach, we deal with individuals and their expectations. How do you manage these expectations? Sometimes the expectation of the individual is different from what you think should be done. How do you deal with that?
I think first and foremost, as an S&C, we have to have a quick reality check that we are there for the athlete. They are not here for us. They are here for themselves and the team. And look, we're there for the athlete and the team as well. So we have to shift any ego that we have aside and in some way or another come to some common ground, and that usually is formed with the way we communicate. There are always going to be expectations from the athlete of how they want to operate, and I encourage that because that shows me that an athlete is actually thinking about how they want to prepare for themselves. They know their body better than anyone, and how they want to prepare. So that's a good thing. I think it's how you communicate your ideas or way of thinking or your advice to the athlete. You shift away any sort of ego and you provide meaning to the athlete around why you want to do something, how you're going to do it. But the how and especially the why is crucially important, why you think they should be doing it. And at the end of the day, if they decide that they want to try a different route, then that's okay. And you have to work with that. And it's almost a little bit of self-discovery as you go. It may be the right way for an athlete to do if they've decided it, or they might say, hey, actually, Nick, you were right, let's try your way of thinking. It's almost providing an environment where they can lead their decisions and you just guide the process in a way that you are actually kind of forming the direction that you want, but you're allowing them to discover that themselves as well, if you know what I mean. Because at the end of the day, I personally want my athletes to be self-sufficient. They need to be thinking about their own performance, and the only way they're going to be doing that is making decisions for themselves. And obviously, I have a certain skill set and experience that I can help guide them based on my knowledge and experience. But I would be more directive with a younger player versus less directive with a senior player. But it's choosing and how you approach those situations and the expectations on those players.
Yeah, you just answered the question that I had in my head, whether how would you deal through different age groups with that? So more directive with youngers, more facilitative with older players. Yes,
because the younger players, they have less training age, they have less experience, and they need to be directed and then you slowly loosen the reins off, allow them to have a little more power and ownership, and then once they get further down into their career and they're a lot more self-sufficient, then you can almost have a facilitative sort of approach, and make sure that you're asking the right questions and you're more collaborative.
Yeah. Cool. In a team of coaches and support staff, everyone is wearing his own hat and wants to do things in the best interest. How do you deal with conflict between different support staff?
I think, and I think conflict, depending on the conflict, is a great thing. You have to have conflict to find the right answers. It has to be constructive. I think at the end of the day, we all have, as long as all the support staff are thinking about what's best for the athlete, I think you always should be able to find a common ground. And we all have different expertise and opinions and perspectives, and that's healthy. If we all had the same idea, perspective, then we would be doing the athlete a disservice around how we approach preparation and performance. I think you have to stick to facts if there is a conflict in ideas, especially between S&Cs and physios. Physio will come to an argument or a discussion, so to speak, around what it means clinically, and then we as S&Cs has to underpin that with what that looks like from an S&C and physical performance point of view. So I mean, the medical and the S&C side of things, the physios and S&Cs, they come hand in hand. The relationship between the two is hugely important, because players will very easily see if there is a conflict between the two. And in my opinion, some of the players will tend to head towards the medical preference, but generally that's only happened once or twice in my career. But because it's an easy route. It's very medical based, and it's a safer option, where performance can be quite confronting and you push players. But yeah, I guess my point being is that you have to have a united front when you are approaching some form of discussion or conflict of differing opinions and directions of programs. So I think that it's very healthy, and you have to just keep in mind that your decisions are team first and player first.
How does a typical day in a life of an S&C coach look like?
S&C in New Zealand or S&C in India?
Maybe both.
Okay, so India, you're essentially with the national team, and you speak to many other cricket teams as well, or any other professional team. You're in a bubble, especially in India, because I was lucky enough to spend the summer in India, and playing for about 4 months against various international teams, and you're in a bubble. You're highly guarded. You've got your own room. There's a lot of security around. You're ushered through to the bus. You're ushered to training. Everything is well controlled. So you're essentially, you wake up in the morning. We either have a morning session, a skill session, or an afternoon session. It's either a 10 to 1 or a 2 to 5 in the nets, or a skills practice. Before the day, or even the night before, I would message out the S&C requirements. I would also have discussions with individual athletes around what their next couple of days would look like, knowing that we have 2, 3, or 4 days in between the next match. And we base those discussions around the workload they've done in the previous game. And we come up with a plan of sometimes 2 or 3 days ahead, what each individual player's workloads would look like from a skill and physical point of view. We would all get up and have breakfast. I would go to the gym. For me, I need to do my own strength work or fitness work, because that sets me up for the day, allows me to have my own time and get a good sweat up, and sometimes reflect, and it fires me up for the day. Get that oxygen going, and then I go to breakfast, and then we either go to training, or if we don't have training, some guys will actually hit the gym in the morning. Otherwise, I will catch up on some form of administration or programming, or that sort of thing. It's a very tight time frame on traditional training days, because they are big days where we've either got gym, we've either got and skills, or we've got one of the other. Because we play so often, a lot of the skill sessions are optional for players, so they get to choose which trainings they go to. Some will go to every single one. Some will only go to 1 or 2 out of 4 days. But there will be allocated sessions where everyone must go to training. And it is quite unique in my experience compared to other sports. But it's purely because these guys play so often. They would just end up training for the training sake. And they wouldn't actually get that balance between S&C and downtime and everything else that's going around their own life, which is much different to New Zealand. I can't say that for the Black Caps because they are very similar, but from a domestic circuit as well. But yeah, it's a full day. So you say you train in the morning, skills, you go there, you get back around 2:30. The guys would either have a mid-afternoon nap or have some downtime, and then we would generally hit the gym between 4 and 7 p.m. And I'm in the gym, and it's hard to program with the national side because you're in hotels. It's much harder to get the full team out into a commercial gym and train. A lot of the stadiums over in India have gyms at the ground, which is great. And if they do, we would either train before or after skills at the ground. So it's all quite heavily security based and locked down. But otherwise, it's all in hotels and they have limited equipment. So essentially, we do quick recce's once we get to the hotel and what equipment are there, and we have base plans around what we need to do for players and who's coming in. It's a longer day. We finish around 7, and then on top of that, I have to do all the GPS work and download and provide feedback, and then any sort of other administration work. On top of that, like you said, I'm doing my master's in business as well, so I do that between whenever I can as well. And so it's a busy day, trying to find your own downtime as well. But it's just go. My wife thinks it's a holiday being over in India, away from here and the kids, but where we were lucky enough to India to travel and tour New Zealand January to March. And my wife and kids came on tour with us, and she was like, "Yep, okay, it's not a holiday. It's pretty full on." So that was a good eye opener for her. So they are long days, but you just have to try and balance that with trying to get your own sort of mental space as well, because it's important to, as a coach, you need to have your own time and some downtime, because otherwise you just get burnt out.
Yeah. How do you design a training program?
Good segue to what I just said. How I would program for an athlete is different now with India to, say, New Zealand, where you have 3 or 4 months of a pre-season. So there's two ways I would do it. I'll start with India because it's the freshest one. There's a mentality that you just have to choose one or two physical aspects that you really have to try and hone in on. Essentially, like you train the player first, you find out where they're coming from, what injury history, and what's their number one skill set. What's their sports specific skill set? What are they currently working on at the moment? You get that information, and how do they want to play their sport? How do they want to express their skills on the field? Okay, cool. So how do I underpin that in a program where you have probably 3 days between a game and limited gym facility equipment? So my philosophy is that these guys are in this national squad for a reason. They are already exceptionally good at what they do. So instead of developing a physical quality, let's just get them better at what they're already good at. So for example, if someone's already very quick, let's just make them even better, or give them the physical capacity and qualities and target those in training that will allow them to stay or even get even quicker. It's about enhancing the training environment. An example of that is providing objective data, for example, live GPS data. If you have the ability to, even the GPS watches you can get these days, and give them live feedback of how fast they're running. A simple metric like that will enhance the training environment. And some of these guys didn't realize how fast they can run. And when they've got someone measuring them, or you get a GPS on them in a game, they're coming up to me and going, "How fast did I run today?" They actually want to move quicker and play faster and harder. So you're setting up in a training environment that is making their current skill set even better. From a gym point of view, like I said, you have to understand what their skill set is and the demands of the game, and underpin that with, at that current time, what their current physical priority is. It could be max strength, it could be absolute relative power, it could be speed, it could be purely just body care, shoulder care, prehabilitative sort of gym work, essentially. So essentially how I program it is I based on a tour or 2 tours ahead, I would know what their players' physical priorities are, and I ought to have different options for each quality that we would interchange on. Because essentially a player could be picked and he's playing 3 days later, versus a player is not selected, so he has 6 days to prepare. So there's a great opportunity in strategically choosing days when to push and when to pull or just hold. So you have to have options for each one. It's a different sort of programming style in international cricket, because you have to be ready for selection, and your period of preparation can change based on selection. We travel with 15 players, 11 play, and I tend to really push the non-players really hard, and treat that 6-day window, for example, as a micro dose pre-season, where I would really push them hard the first half of the week and then ease off the next, because they could be selected for the next. where guys like Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, all format players, these guys play year round, and we just have to strategically choose our days when we really push them based on their game workloads. So, for example, Virat Kohli, he gets a duck, if you know what that means. He doesn't do much with the bat. He hasn't got a lot of running in under his belt, and he's fielding in slips or in short. He doesn't have a lot of volume, so we can get into the gym the next day and really push him from a strength and a power point of view. Versus if he scores 100 and he's actually buggered, then we would ease up. But he would come to me and go, okay, I feel like I need something. Okay, right, we're knowing that what you did yesterday, we would adjust his plan based on his workload. And just getting to know him versus a domestic scene where you have probably through 3, 4, 5 months off-season, pre-season, you can really get down into exactly the same sort of process, understanding the sport, understanding their number one skill set, how they want to play the game, how the team wants to play the game, and the demands coming up, and formulate, really structured training blocks that lead into each other. So you just have more time, essentially, identifying key physical qualities from block one, and then essentially it's again more advice to a young self. Back then I planned 4 or 5 months ahead. You soon pretty quickly learn that what you plan 5 months down the track changes 3 weeks in. There's a lot of things that you have to be adaptable in your programming. You used to have a blueprint of where you want to help this athlete and where they want to head, but you have to be adaptable. You start with some general movement to max strength and to speed and power, but it's not generally linear. And as experience, you get to learn which sort of physical qualities can be programmed together and what can lead on to the next. And the cost of, say, eccentric training. What's the cost of incorporating that into your S&C program, which is highly neurally driven, which means that players will be sore, they will be fatigued. Do we implement those sort of techniques into an international scene when you've only got 2 or 3 days between matches? Probably not. But certain targeted eccentric work, say hamstrings and that, you would build over time, for example. So there's a lot going on. But I guess to answer your question in short, like the philosophies and how you program for domestic team and international team, the starting point is the same, but just the time is the determining factor.
Yeah. That leads almost perfectly into the next question. You're the head of S&C for the national cricket team in India. How do you distribute efforts or responsibilities? Do you all do it by yourself? And the next question is, because it literally are different tasks, right? You have batsmen, you have wicket keepers, you have bowlers. They all have to do different things. How do you manage that?
I think it's important that us as coaches and support crew, we're all on the same page. There's not a hell of a lot of time from a skill point of view to develop, because you're playing so often, developing a certain skill set or a technique. It's more honing in what's going to enhance performance. But I think we all have different agendas, so to speak, on performance. Physios are medical, batting coaches are batting, obviously bowling is bowling. But the key, and they can almost be segregated, they can always be separated from a skill point of view, and they are. That's why there's separate coaches for each skill set. Where from an S&C point of view, based on the initial conversations that you have with a player, what do they want to achieve? How do they want to play their game? I could be dealing with an all-rounder who bats and bowls, and they all have to field. So it's the communication between me and the link between the medical and all the skills coaches, and getting their opinion of how we develop it. We're always having those corridor conversations with the coaches around what they think, what they think from a skill point of view and a technical point of view that will enhance their performance in a couple of days' time or 2 tours' time. And then how I underpin that in my S&C program, whether that's through gym, running-based programming in their warm-ups, some potentiation work or priming work, and how does that incorporate into their preparation? It's more those conversations with the skills coaches, because look, that's a really difficult part, because the skills coach could be saying one thing, but I'm doing another thing that could be totally negating what the coaches are actually wanting. So it's those conversations that are hugely important, and everyone getting on the same page and singing from the same song sheet.
Yeah. Okay. You've mentioned the name Virat Kohli before. He's considered one of the fittest cricket players to play the game. How much is nature and how much is nurture?
Bit of both. I think that it was, speaking to Virat, and he'll be the first one to say that, and I wasn't around then, this is just through purely conversations with Virat. It's been quite a transformational process for him. And it was quite, it's very similar to many other Indians in India. He was playing his cricket and he was tubby and overweight and didn't understand the benefits of fitness and S&C and how being fit can influence his skill set. Because there's it's still unfortunately some mentality in India, lower downgrades, that to be successful in cricket, you just need to bat, you just need to bowl, you just need to field to be fit. But what I'm saying is that's just not enough. And with Virat, he had a transformational moment where he realized that if he was going to survive in Indian cricket and compete and get the best out of himself, and not only take ownership of his own program, but lead other people around, he needed to change. And look, full credit to him and the support crew that he had from 2011 to really change his mentality and his mindset and the way he was able to influence others to really buy into the training process in Indian cricket. Look, there's still a long way to go, I feel. Now I've been integrated into the environment 7 or 8 months. But Virat's an exceptional person, an exceptional player. And he, like I said, it's been quite a transformational process, and he's really driven the need for fitness and S&C and linking that between if you want to be able to hit the ball harder, bowl faster, run between wickets, win the key moments in a game, you need to be fitter, and it'll also allow you to be able to handle long tours. And if anything, it's going to allow you to recover much quicker between matches, because even in domestic scene in India, you play a lot of cricket. Yeah. So it's about linking, S&C and physical readiness to what is a skilled dominant sport.
Cool. Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Yeah. There could be a couple of good young practitioners as well. I could give you a couple of ideas. Quite interesting would be, Scott Logan, who New Zealand hockey.
I know Scott.
He could be quite a good little interview. He's doing a lot of stuff with ASIA as well, and he's been in that role for quite some years, and it's been quite a transformational process with that program as well. So you could talk to him. If you wanted to go left field, you could go to Heinrich Milan as well, who's, like I said, I was in the trenches with him in New Zealand cricket. He's a skill coach, but very good people leader, great coach. He understands that you could delve into more leadership and how he sets up training and developing athletes. You could go on that line. You could go a guy called, if you wanted to delve more into rugby as well, there's a guy called Adam Keane, who also worked for New Zealand cricket, but he's now working in Japan, rugby. You have also got a guy called Scott McLaren, who is an ex-decathlete here in New Zealand, but he's also worked for New Zealand cricket, and he's working in high school sport as well. So he's got a vast experience as well. And he's also competed Commonwealth Games, I think, as well. So I know them all personally, so I know they'd have great conversations with you. But there are many others that you could have as well. Those are the guys that I've dealt with, and I think they'll be great conversations and maybe open up different avenues of conversations for you as well, and to your readers and your listeners.
Yeah, thanks. That's cool. Where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram. It's crazy how that's blown up since I've been in India. Nick.Webby is the username. You can follow me there. I try to, you almost feel like you've got an obligation to share training videos and my experiences and life in India to those fans, and people are just hungry for information. So you'll find a lot of stuff on there. I'm not a big user of Twitter, to be fair. But you'll also, obviously email it and WhatsApp in that, but I'll try and keep all my personal stuff to my personal life. But the main social media site is Instagram.
Cool. Nick, thanks a lot for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers, buddy.